Today's session we're looking at schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. Schizophrenia is probably the thing that the lay people talk mostly about as the madness and the craziness. And there's a lot of stigma around schizophrenia and a lot of prejudice and a lot of limited understanding. So there really isn't sufficient time to go into all the detail, but it's something that I would encourage you to read up more about. Especially because so many of the movies, the sort of Hollywood movies coming out, misrepresent what schizophrenia is to the general public. So read up, try and increase the knowledge of those around you so that we can reduce the prejudice around this. Let's start off. Schizophrenia is a type of psychosis. So what is psychosis? Now, Freud, way back when, used to speak about psychotic patients and neurotic patients. A neurotic patient is someone who is anxious and nervous. They have a nervous condition. Psychotic patient was someone who seemed to lose touch with reality. Now, we can sometimes say that I feel a bit psychotic. For example, in families where there are high levels of domestic violence, there could be a horrible domestic violence incident one night where somebody punches and gets badly hurt, and everybody wakes up the next morning and it's as if that didn't happen. Everybody's smiling, it's swept under the carpet, and that's a psychotic experience of, did that really happen last night? What is the reality here? Okay. So psychosis is when reality shifts. It's like you're not quite sure what the reality is. Did that happen? Didn't that happen? And it can go from a very subtle, sort of, if we look at psychosis on a dimensional component, go from very subtle of, did I dream this? Did I just see this? To a very severe case of people completely losing touch with reality. That I sit here thinking that I am the Queen of England. I completely lost touch with the reality. I'm not the Queen of England. But if you were to speak to me, I'd say, no, my name is Elizabeth, and I've got 4 children. Charles and I can't remember the other 2's names, but I absolutely positively believe that I am the Queen of England. That is psychosis, a person who's living in a different reality and lost touch with reality. Now, why I speak about the dimensional component is when psychosis begins for someone, it often starts very slowly. It might start with what we would term an auditory hallucination. Did I just hear something? No, I must be making that up. Okay. Is that an extra voice talking through the speakers to me? No, I must be dreaming. But it starts subtly like that, and it begins to increase, where a person is having these experiences more and more frequently. Maybe hallucinations, thinking that they hear things, auditory hallucinations, see things that aren't really there, tactile hallucinations, feel things on their skin, like creepy crawlies up and down their skin, which aren't really there, and they have them more and more frequently. You also have delusions, which are beliefs that are not true or real. For example, I am not the Queen of England, so I would be deluded in believing that. And what happens is that a person starts having these what we term positive symptoms of psychosis. And eventually there are enough symptoms there for us to say this is more than just a psychotic experience. This is more than just a weird what happened here experience. There's actually a sufficient amount for this to be considered a proper schizophrenic episode. Now, schizophrenia has 2 sides to it. The one is the positive symptoms. Positive symptoms, things get added to reality. You hear things that aren't there, maybe see things that aren't there, believe things. There's something like thought insertion, where I might believe that people can put ideas in my head. Thought broadcasting, where I believe that you can read my internal thoughts. Special messages, when Rian Kruiwagen, our old famous South African news reporter, reads the news, he's actually sending me a special message from the KGB. And these are all incorrect beliefs that aren't realistic. So extra things get added. The negative symptoms of schizophrenia is things start falling away. So things don't get added to my reality, but things that I'm supposed to be able to do in reality fall away. I can no longer speak coherently. I sometimes lose my ability to dress and groom myself. Abolition is the loss of speech. Sometimes people will speak in rhymes and they will think that people can understand them, and then you say, and I must say three times, and it will be this weird way of speaking which to them makes complete sense. But to you, this is some garbled, weird language that the person's speaking. They think that they're speaking this. The other thing is the anhedonia, and what we mean by that is a loss of pleasure and a loss of participation. People start withdrawing. They might sit at a table and not really participate, even to the point that they're completely shut down. Sometimes with awareness, sometimes because they're beginning to realize that they're experiencing the symptoms of their schizophrenic episode, or sometimes they might be completely oblivious, and we need to get collateral from family members so they can describe to us the slow decline of the patient into a schizophrenic episode. So this is the more accurate understanding of schizophrenia, and the whole history of the split mind, Emil Kraplin's term of dementia that comes through the history, you can read more about in your books. But what we're speaking of is people who have psychotic experiences that have got both positive and negative symptoms. It's a slow deterioration. There's a strong genetic etiology, meaning that the cause for people to have this has been primarily said to be genetic. There's also neurobiological explanations, and that people think that the dopamine, which is your neuroreceptors and neurochemicals in your brain, remember the chemistry factory, the chemicals aren't flowing properly, or the structure of your brain. In your notes on neurobiology, when you had a look at the lobes and the limbic system and the all the different parts of the brain, the hindbrain, the midbrain, that some scientists have found that the parts of the brain are not structured like everybody's part of the brain is. So there are a number of explanations. There's still not conclusive results as to what causes schizophrenia, but we know that there is a biological component, and we know that it is best treated with medication on an ongoing basis. There are 4 types of main categories of schizophrenia. The paranoid type, which is the most popular or shown in the movies most often, is people who believe that maybe somebody's following them, somebody's out to get them, you sending messages to me, or that you can hear my thoughts. There are strong hallucinations or delusions of persecution, and they think they're very important. I am the president and you are going to kill me. So that's a paranoid type, a paranoia about and a threat to their safety. The catatonic type is a person who, it's quite rare, we don't see it that often. It's people who have echolalia, which is a repetition. So if you were speaking and you said, "How are you today?" I'd say, "How are you today?" And "Are you well? Are you well?" I would repeat everything that you said. Or echopraxia, if you scratched your head, I would scratch your head. I would be copying everything that you do. Also, that it can happen, I can have agitation, I can move quickly, or retardation, and even almost you'll see in the book it speaks about a waxy. We don't let people get to this stage, but previously when there was a medication to treat catatonic schizophrenia, people would become almost statuesque, and they could stand like this for hours and hours on end. I'm stuck in like a wax model position. Obviously, we don't want people to get to that stage. We put them on medication, but it's as if their limbs stiffen up and they can't even move in their bodies, which points a lot to the cause might be a lot in the brain in terms of the brain's chemistry and this functioning of the nervous system. You also get the disorganized type, which is that a person's speech is disrupted. They often have what we call flat affect. They show no emotion. Again, hallucinations or delusions. And what's interesting about the disorganized type is it's quite unpredictable. We can't say when the episodes are going to happen. Each episode lasts a different length. So it's a more unpredictable, and that's why we call it disorganized, compared to someone who's got a paranoid delusion, which is often an ongoing chronic belief that I am Queen Elizabeth, or an ongoing chronic belief that I am the president and you are out to get me. Then the undifferentiated is the last category in schizophrenia, which is kind of, it doesn't fit into any category. There's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, sometimes depression, sometimes sort of stranger behaviors. But as I said, all of these 4 categories do need to be treated by a psychiatrist. Not even a referral to a psychologist. If you had to see someone who was displaying these symptoms, I would refer immediately to a general practitioner or a GP who would refer to a psychiatrist who would put a person on medication. They'd be on medication for most of their life. And even when people are on medication, people with schizophrenia still often might have an episode, which will vary in how long it lasts. It also, for people for schizophrenia, probably and in majority of cases means an inpatient admission to a psychiatric hospital, a Wes-Koppies, a Lentegeur, a Falkenberg, but a inpatient program for about 2 or 3 weeks. So the thing that you need to look out for schizophrenia is anyone who's displaying maybe positive symptoms, they're hearing things, seeing things, talking about things that do not really exist in our world, or they're beginning to lose their ability to speak properly, move properly. And the minute you start seeing this, next thing to do is to ask that old genetic question, because remember I said schizophrenia is genetic. Is there someone in the family who's ever battled with this before? What we know about schizophrenia is it usually starts somewhere between 19 and 22 for males, and a little bit later in the 20s for young women. So if you had to see a person who was sitting in front of you who was a male between 19 and 23 who was reporting some of these things, you'd immediately send them to a doctor, because you'd have a sense that this might be what is happening for them. And for women, it might be a little bit later. There's some other sort of disorders like schizophreniform and schizoaffective disorder and shared delusional disorder, a brief psychotic episode that you'll see in your readings. But as I say, these need to be treated by a specialist. A very interesting field, schizophrenia, something that we don't know much about, but certainly something that we should refer on immediately if we had someone describe these symptoms to us.